In this video, we're going to cover conditional logic and nested if statements. We're going to cover a few things, so let's get into it. First, I want to comment on this. When you're doing an if statement or a for loop or a while loop or a do while loop, just put in the brackets and everything first. It's going to need them. It's going to cut down. If you develop the habit early, it's going to cut down on 90% of your errors. You don't have to listen to me. You can choose to do what you want. And I'm just this friendly little piece of advice. I have far less errors as a result of that. And I've tested it and I've looked at it and I watch the students I tutor. And the ones who pick up on it make far less errors. And you might think an error is no big deal. Think of errors as a waste of time. Let's say you wanted to go on a trip and the only thing you had to do was pack your bags and everything was covered and paid for. Well, on your way to packing your bags, there was an error, and it cost you 10 days. You were looking forward to the trip, but because of the error, you had to wait 10 days to get to your trip. That's what errors cause in programming. They waste time for you getting to the final result, the end product, the end project, the completion of the thing you're trying to do in code. They waste time. We have a lot of time wasters in the world, and we don't need more of them. One little trick is to type these braces if you know you're going to need them. If you're writing an if statement, always, we could get into, you could have one line of code here. That is the same as that. And you might think, well, that looks cleaner. It looks cleaner, but what if I want to add an additional line of code in there? Then what? If the brackets aren't there, what this really does is says, if this condition is true, do this, then here's this line of code, then, oh, we got an error because this else isn't connected to anything. It actually breaks it. I see a lot of students just omit their brackets, and you can. I think it also it leads back to it opens the door for more errors down the road, having to write more code instead of just putting them in, because if they're in there already, all I have to do is press enter and now type the additional code I want to add. If I don't do that, then I have to type in the extra bracket, like for here, for example. Okay, let's say I want to add this. Well, now I have to go through here and add the code, and then I gotta bring all this junk up here, and then, oh, this doesn't, maybe that's how I wanted it, that's fine. But again, it's wasting time, and there's enough time wasting going on. This, I think, is the bad way to approach it. You can omit them, it means you don't have to have them there, that's fine, you can do that, but I just think, just put them in place. Most of the time you're going to have an if statement that's going to do multiple things instead of just one, anyways. So just put the brackets in and just quit thinking about it. Develop the habit, put them in there, and if you have to come back to that code in the future, you don't have to waste time typing in these extra crap. So, how does this work? How does an if statement work? If, then else. How does that work? Well, it looks at what's in here. So 1 equals 1, for example. 1 does equal 1. It's the exact same thing. So this returns true. And then it'll run this line of code. Let's add some text here. If we run this, true. 1 does equal 1. While 1 is not, is this true? 1 not equal to 1. Is that a true statement? It's false. 1 is not equal to 1. It's still true, because this is it's evaluating, that's true. But 1, it's true that 1 is not equal to 1. Is 1 equal, or 3 equal to 1? It's also false. So what's happening here is there's a Boolean expression being evaluated. This is evaluating to a true or false statement. And based on that answer, it's going to do this code or this code. Another way to think about it is if this didn't exist and we wanted to print this if this was true, else we wanted to print false, or we run it, notice we don't get anything. The reason for that is we don't have an else statement. Basically saying, if this is true, do that, else there's nothing else. In this situation, we actually have where we're taking care of both sides of the coin, so to speak. The condition is either going to be true or false. And if we run it, well, we know that it's false. Is 3 equal to 3? Well, we know that that's true. So how this works is it evaluates this. If it's true or false, if it's true, it does the code in here. And then it skips this altogether. This code never gets evaluated. If this condition is true, this code gets done. If this condition is false, it ignores this code and does whatever's in the else clause. And that's the basics of an if-else statement. Now, this idea of nesting is when you take code, you have an if condition, an else condition. Now this could get really confusing. We'll call this outer. And we run that. Now we're seeing the false and the true. How this works, a nested just means you have something inside of something. This if statement is inside of this if statement. You have the header, and the curly brackets represent the body of the thing, and then anything inside of that is referred to as a nested something. A nested statement, a nested loop, a nested method call, whatever. And they can get kind of confusing, and that's why I say put in your curly brackets, because they get less confusing. I've seen this done, which is, in my opinion, is very confusing and ugly to look at, and hard to figure out what's going on. If you indent your code, and then indent your code again, why are we getting that weird error? Okay. By indenting your code, it makes it easier to look at and easier to kind of understand that, okay, this is inside of this if statement, and this is inside of this if statement. So comment your code, that's one rule, but also indent your code. The general rule of thumb is your class file, curly brace, and the closing go directly against the left edge. All your methods from that point forward are tabbed in one tab. If we had more here, we'd see that there's essentially a straight line. There would be a straight line here. In fact, we can test that, or we can show that. And it creates a straight line of code. The reason for this is it makes it one organized and neat. Makes it easier to read. And once you have your methods tabbed in, then you take the code that's inside of your methods, and all that gets tabbed over one more. If you have an if statement, the code inside of that is tabbed over yet again. And if you have an if statement, again, further tabbed in. And it creates this kind of step look to things where the code is tabbed in and you can read it and kind of see it a lot cleaner, a lot easier. Errors show up a lot faster. Again, errors are time wasters, and we don't need time wasters when we're writing code. Ideally, if we could think about something the code was written, how great would that be? If we had errors, that would slow that process down even. So that's if statements. There's this one other idea. Just to kind of show else condition was, that code was entered. The other one never even encountered that. And the if condition. There's one other idea, which is an if-else, or if and then an else-if. And when you do this is when you have a series of conditions you want to check. The if condition was true. Let's make that false. Else if condition. Notice it's evaluating that. And then else. So this isn't true, this first one. Then this one it's checked. That's not true. Then this else just do this after that. And it does that. This is how you connect a series of if conditions. Now, there's a general rule. If you have to do many of these, I would probably use a switch statement. It just looks cleaner. It's a lot easier to think through the process of it. And yeah, it can be better code. So if this is going to get bloated where you have more if statements. Now, if you had nested if statements, you could use a switch statement and have if statements within the switch statement. But if you start to get over too many of these if, else, ifs and thing, if you had like 30 of these, I would say use a switch statement. You don't need that many. There's probably some redundancy built in if you did have that much. And that's pretty much it. That's the if statement and the else if and how it kind of works.